Hey guys, welcome to Crowning Judas. My name's Ashley. I usually like to start off by giving a disclaimer that a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about can be triggering to some people. This episode probably more so than the other ones if you've been following along. I really want to stress that your mental health is incredibly important. So if you need to pause, step away, come back, please do so. But this episode is called Toba the Tura. And so if you haven't been following along, my son has asked me to name all of the episodes of Crowning Judas after our favorite album, Razia's Shadow. It's a concept album by Forgive Durden. And it's really interesting because all of the tracks have kind of followed a similar pattern to my journey. And so I really kind of wanted to explain first who Toba the Tura is. So Toba the Tura in this concept album is not the prosecutor, not the judge, not the executioner. He is the witness that is sent in to hold Arima responsible for the destruction that they caused. And so as I was preparing for this episode, I got to thinking about my journey and how it's not just me witnessing and expressing what other people have done or the Judases, in your own life, but really looking at what you did to cause the damage, the harm. I've shared previously that we're all kind of mirrors for everyone else, and everyone is a mirror back to you on the things that you need to work on. And so looking at my journey, the things that I've noticed are, abandonment wounds where I was once, anxiously attached and, had kind of healed that and got to a more secure, attachment style. Recently I learned that there are some things that I'm still healing and working through. We're all kind of healing, and we're all working on stuff, and I've come to find that some things, give me an avoidant attachment where the more someone pushes for something with me or pushes for my time or my attention when I just don't have the capacity, it definitely pushes me away. And that's something that I knew that I kind of like closed myself off and kind of hermited in when I was going through stuff, but I found that was something else that I needed to work on. And so utilizing the situations and circumstances that you have with people to see where you yourself need healing and growth. And so while I was preparing for Toba the Tura, I got to looking at like parables and Bible verses that kind of spoke to that and kind of paralleled that. So I got to thinking about the watcher on the wall, which is Ezekiel chapter 33. And on the watcher on the wall, God has asked the watchman to sound the trumpet if there is, an attack. And so he says in there, if the watchman sounds the trumpet and people listen, great. If they sound the trumpet and they don't listen, then the blood's not on their hands because they did what they were supposed to. They sounded the trumpet and they told the truth. If the watchman doesn't speak the truth and doesn't sound the trumpet, that the deaths and the blood's going to be on the watchman's hands. And so it got me thinking about the cost of silence. And I'm kind of at this point in my journey where the cost of silence is way more than fear. Way more than fear of not being believed. Way more than fear of someone finding me. Way more than fear of retribution or retaliation that is even more than has already been done. Because that silence leads to more harm. Because they think that they are infallible. They think that they are, above punishment and accountability. And so on my journey, I have come to realize that my pattern recognition skills are kind of off the charts, and it's like the ADHD and autism thing. And I have come to find that usually with attempts at being held accountable is usually when the acts of slander and defamation and retaliation have kind of like uptick. I don't know how to say that. And so, like I said, the cost of silence is way more than what could happen. And so, in my own journey, I think it's first important to explain kind of my mindset and my vulnerability when all of this started. So in September of 22, I separated from my ex-husband. And so I ended up moving in with my mom and my stepdad. My ex-husband and I lived on his family's property, and so obviously I was the one to leave. And so we decided to have my children stay with him primarily so they could stay in the same school. They could still be watched by their grandma who had retired to take care of them. And so the least disruption for them, the better. And so in December, which I've spoken briefly about, I was in an accident. It was right after I had the flu for a week. And so there's a lot of mitigating factors in that, but it resulted in a detention or arrest for suspicion of DWI while my children were in the vehicle. And so when that happened, the BAC results weren't back yet, and I wasn't formally charged until 6 months later. But the first chair, ADA, in the county that I worked in had called my boss to tell her that I needed to be terminated. And so with that came shame and I guess just confusion because, here I am. I've worked, almost 8 years busting my butt nonprofit trying to help as many kids as I can. And it seemed like everything was against me and I didn't know what to do and I didn't know where to go. No one was talking to me at this point. I had maybe 3 or 4 people reach out the entire time. And like I said, I'd worked there for almost 8 years. And so I was in a really vulnerable headspace. Things weren't great with my mom and I. And so I didn't really feel like I had anybody in my corner. And so I mention that because a lot of times in cases like mine, that is looked at as prey. They are vulnerable. People who are in situations like mine are essentially the perfect target. I had been with my ex-husband for 15 and a half years and hadn't really dated much, before him. And so, I guess I was really inexperienced and I was vulnerable. And, that led to me, I guess, believing in the wrong person. So I don't want to assign motives. I will not be saying their name. I don't want to assign titles to what happened. But I do want to explain the turn of events that kind of led me to this point. Because my purpose for crowning Judas is to not redeem or glorify the actor, but speak on the actions that happened that led to failures. Because I feel like once you put a voice to something, once you speak on something, A, it doesn't have power over you anymore. B, it helps other people realize that they're not alone. And C, it helps them recognize whether or not they might be in a similar situation. So I had worked with this person for several years, but it was intermittent and I honestly didn't even remember them. But they saw that I was on Facebook dating about 6 months after the separation. So it was a little after the divorce was finalized. And they invited me out for coffee. And I was already not really feeling it, but I, have passion projects that I'm working on. So I thought it would be okay to just meet up with them, see if our professional projects aligned. So I had already been speaking with a mutual friend about it, and they said that they did a poll around the office, and they were like, yeah, the consensus is no, but you make your own decisions, so you do you. So I'm like, okay. So I ended up meeting for coffee, and as soon as I got back in my car, I was like, hey, just so you know, you're really cool. I think that we could definitely help each other out with our projects, but I'm not feeling it. There's no sparks. And so that's where the lack of boundaries and the love bombing came in. I was in a very vulnerable headspace. Like I said, nobody was really talking to me. And they ended up becoming kind of like my best friend. They were the only ones that was really talking to me. They were trying to help with looking at my case, because I knew I had all these mitigating factors and I just needed someone to listen. And so they weren't listening to my boundaries, though. And that's something that I should have recognized from the beginning, where I would say no and they would just push and push and push. And so eventually things with my mom and I did not go very well. And I don't want to say coerced, but I didn't feel like I had many options other than moving in with this person who at the time we ended up starting to date, and then it became official. And so I had moved all my podcast equipment over there, and it seemed okay. The boundaries were still kind of pushed, and he still kept trying to lock me down, put a ring on it, and I was like, bro, I have way too much on my mind to think about that. And so at this point, I still had my old work that was defaming me, trying to get me kicked off a fundraiser. They were slandering me in the community, trying to get me to not be on the board of directors for another company. And so I had all of these chaotic events and things that were going on in my life that kind of, I think in a sense, blinded me to the relationship situation. And so it had started escalating, where they were getting more and more frustrated with not just me, but my kids. Didn't want to get emotional. My children are heaven sent. Absolutely heaven sent. And I am convinced that my daughter has a direct line, a direct connection with God. And I probably would have stayed had it not been for my son. Because I had been trying to move back in with my mom. I told her that I didn't feel safe there. And she told me that we argued too much. And so I couldn't come back home. And I was resigned to stay there until my son told me that he didn't feel safe. And that he hadn't felt safe for a few months, but he didn't want to tell me. Because he said that he knew that I loved this person. And immediately I went into trying to get out. And so it turned out that my old boss that I worked for, he and his wife had agreed to let me stay with him for a few weeks until I could find housing. And they helped me get out. God is so amazing. So amazing. So the day that I decided to leave, I wasn't going to say anything. I was just going to go. And then I didn't want to be chicken shit. And so I decided to say something. And I told him that I was afraid of what he was going to do, because at this point I already had the charge for DWI. I just was going through a lot, and I didn't know what he was going to do. And he told me that I could get things out of the house while he was still there, but he was going to go to the football game to watch his daughter cheer. And so I told him okay. And, well, I guess before that. So I had been at my attorney's office reviewing the evidence for my case, and I was trying to find someone that had just a truck that could help me leave. And so I had asked my friend, which he isn't a close friend to where we talk all the time, but he's a good friend of my ex-husband's, and he and I had always been good. And I messaged him to see if he could help me, and his wife messaged me almost immediately. And she said, "Girl, I've been there. I've got you. I've got a Suburban." And not, I don't know. I don't know how long it was after that, but it wasn't very long. She messaged me and she said, "Hey, is this your boyfriend's number?" And I said, "No, it's not. Why?" And she said that someone had called her phone and left a voicemail and just said, "Hi, Ashley." And her name's not Ashley, but mine is. And it was in the middle of, hey, come here. Come here, baby. It was in the middle of us talking about me leaving. And to me, it was just a sign from God that this was absolutely the right move and I was doing the right thing. And so she did help me get out, and we got the stuff from the bedroom before he went to the football game. And he told me that I could come the next day before he went. I don't remember what organization thing he had that night, but before a certain time, and I could get my stuff and it would be fine. Well, that night he called me and he was mad that I wouldn't tell him where my podcast equipment was, and was convinced that it was because I was putting it somewhere that he wouldn't approve of. And so he refused to give me my belongings. He told me that the next day wasn't going to work and that I just had to deal with it. And so the next day, that was like a 3-hour conversation, I want to say. But the next day we talked again, and he said, I'm going to put your podcast stuff outside, and if you get it, you get it, and you don't, you don't. And the night before, he had already freaked me out because he had said, I turned my location off, and he said, "Well, you think that their place is a secret, like I don't already know where you are." Which freaked me out because he is former federal law enforcement at the time he was still in. And I don't know a lot about that, but I do know that, people have certain, programs or whatever that they can find you in. So the next day, my friend's like, "No, we're going to get your stuff." And I messaged two off-duty officers nearby, and I was like, "Hey, what's a civil assist?" And they were like, "Well, you can basically get your toothbrush and, whatever." And so I asked them to meet me at the house. They were friends of mine, or I thought they were friends of mine. And I asked for them to meet me to just be a presence because my ex-boyfriend cares a lot about his image. And I thought, if they're there, he's not going to act up. And so he closes the door on us once he opens it. And then I think he called me, and I said, "Just give me my things and then I'll go." And he said, "No, I told you today's not a good day. Y'all need to get off my property before I call the police." And I said, "Do not, do not hang up on me." I said, "I will call your chain of command." And he hung up on me. And so I called our mutual friend, who is still a chain of command, but not like the tip top. And they didn't answer. So I called the tip top chain of command. And I said, "Hey, I don't know if you remember me, but, this is the situation. Like, we broke up. I'm trying to get my things. He's not giving them to me." And she said, "Give me a few minutes." And at this point, he's still messaging me, like, "Get off my property." So we leave. And she says that I'm allowed to come back and get my stuff, but I'm the only one allowed in, and we can pass stuff. And I said, "Okay, that's fine. Like, just give me my stuff." He does not let me in. He and his daughter and her boyfriend pack up my things and pass it through. Some of the things were still missing, but I didn't at the time know that. So I was leaving, and I realized that I had put my spare car key on like the hook behind the door. So I messaged her, and he's still texting me, and he's asking me questions and asking if I feel good about this. And she puts a no contact order in place. And so I messaged her and I said, hey, or I think I called her and I said, hey, my spare car key's there. Can you just have him put it outside and I'll come by and get it? So she says, okay. He put it in a planter. So I go back and I look for it and I don't see it anywhere. And I looked for a couple minutes before I heard the garage door open up. He comes out and he goes around to the side and he fills up this water pail. And I go over there and I said, hey, where's my car key? And he says, oh, so now you want to talk to me? And I said his name and I said, where's my fucking car key? And he ignores me. And then he says, you did that wrong. Something along the lines of, that's childish and you shouldn't have called her. He had already threatened me when he gave me my stuff, telling me that I made things so much worse for myself by calling her. And then, the thing with the car keys. So I'm like, just tell me where my car key is. So I'm still looking, can't find it. And he pulls it out of his pocket. So at this point, I'm distraught and I leave. And I thought that was the end of it. I thought, I can get a third party to get the things that I had in his storage unit out. And I didn't want to call her. I didn't want to get him in trouble. I really just wanted my stuff. And so I leave and he ends up going to my company Facebook page and liking several of the things. I think it was maybe like 4 likes. But I'm the only one who's on that company. So it was specifically for me to see. And so I told her what happened and she said she was going to put a no contact order in place and that was going to be it. During that time, he messages my friends, 1, 2, 3, at least 4 friends, my old boss, my mom, my grandma. The chain of command allows my dad to be the intermediary between my ex-boyfriend and getting my belongings. And he tells him, well, I'm not going to give them to her until I have a conversation with her. And my dad says, oh, well, I think that's reasonable. And I guess my ex-boyfriend told his chain of command and she said, no, she doesn't have to talk to you if she doesn't want to talk to you. Give her stuff. So they go, they get my stuff. And so while they did that, he had snuck a letter into the shoebox that he had given my dad to give to me. And he's like, oh, she's going to want these shoes. And so I didn't get the shoes right away. I didn't get them until a few days later. And when I did, it triggered me all over again. And I still remember some of the letter. I have a picture of it. But in the letter, he's talking about why I did what I did and my actions and still trying to love bomb me and gaslight me into thinking that I'm the problem and his actions are justified. And I think one of the lines that he's used is, well, your actions have reactions. And, in this mindset, I was conditioned to think that I was the one that was wrong. And so I get the letter and the whole time I'm reporting it to his chain of command. I'm reporting it every time he messaged someone, every time he called someone. So then came, let's see, I think that's the same week. So, on the 25th of October, I had my plea deal for the DWI incident. And, just before that, he had continued to get everybody on his side. My family, my friends, the chain of commands, our mutual chain of command friend. And the mutual friend sent me a message like, oh, did you get his letter? And I was like, yes, I got his letter. And every time he was brought up, every time someone gave me a message, his sister messaged me, his ex-girlfriend messaged me, everybody was just nonstop about talking to him. And I wasn't going to do it. And So the mutual says, well, I've told him under no uncertain terms, do not contact any third parties to get to her. And not even, let's see, that was at 9:30 or so. And by 3-ish, he'd already messaged my grandma again. And she told him, she's scared of you, leave her alone. And he's like, but I'm not scary. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't done anything. And just trying to plead his case. And that was kind of the last straw. I told his chain of command again when she got back. And I guess that wasn't the last straw, but she talked to him about it when she got back on the 20th and told him any further action was going to result in like UCMJ sanctions or was going to be criminal, something like that. And that same night, he emails the prosecutor, the district attorney pro tem on my case, because they had to get a special prosecutor, emails him about how I'm, irresponsible and I'm this and I'm that and I haven't taken accountability and just trying to throw me under the bus before my plea hearing on the 25th. And so I didn't find out about that letter until the 25th. And I still didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to get him in trouble. I just wanted him to stop. So on the 27th, I called his chain of command and told her how scared I was of him and that he just wouldn't stop, that he was relentless, and told her that I was afraid to end up like Vanessa Guillen. And she raises her voice at me and tells me now, Ashley, wait just a minute. Other than saying he's a law enforcement officer, like he can email whoever he wants, even though it was retaliation for me calling her in the first place. So after that, I'm like sobbing and I get off the phone. And I didn't hear more from him for about a month. So in November, I had been talking to someone and I went on a date. And at this point, I was dog sitting for my mom's neighbor. And I had mentioned that the house that I was dog sitting for, was my mom's neighbor. And so the next day I saw a box of flowers on my mom's porch. And my ex-boyfriend had sent me flowers from that same company before. But originally I just thought that it was for my mom and I was going to stop and put them in the house for her and then leave. And so I got out of my car and I checked them and, saw that they were for me, and I opened them. And they were sunflowers, and sunflowers are my favorite. I have tattoos on the back of my arm, so it's not like a secret that they're my favorite. And so I get them, and I messaged my best friend. I said, we're about to be really excited or really pissed off. Like, I didn't know what to think. So I open the box, and I see the note, and it says, and I'm paraphrasing, but it says, your drive, intelligence, and energy are amazing, or your intelligence, energy, and drive are amazing. And it doesn't say anything else. And so, so I thought. So I put it up, and I take a picture, and I send it to my roommate at the time, who I had moved in with. And after I left, the flowers there, I went to Starbucks. And so I was, working there on my projects, and I sent the message to my roommate and I said, look what I got. And she's like, oh, hey, when you figure out the code, let me know what it is. And I was like, what code are you talking about? And there were numbers on the bottom that I had missed. And I said, well, I should probably figure out what that code is. And so I did like the neonatal alphabet, and I only got maybe like 3 letters in when I realized that it said Schmoop, which was my nickname for him. And I can still feel like the sense of hysteria at realizing that it was him. And at that point, I just thought that he knew where I was, because I was staying, dog sitting at my mom's neighbor's house. And so I was hysterical in the car. And I called my boss, who was like a big brother at the time, and he's like, you need to pull your big girl panties on and do something about it. Like, you need to get angry. Don't get sad. And so I decided at that point, I messaged his chain of command and I was like, I'm going to the police department. I'm going to file a report. Like, I'm tired of this. And so I spent the rest of that day kind of organizing, all of my documents and receipts and timeline and whatnot. And I ended up going that night to the police department. And to them, it didn't meet the elements initially for an emergency protective order. So then I upload all my documents, and that was that night. And then the next day or the day after, I get a call from my detective, and I cannot say enough about how amazing she was. And I don't know if it was because we had like come into contact a couple times before. And so she was just very reassuring that she was going to do everything she could to make sure that it was investigated and looked into. And she did. And she said that she was going to call the chain of command to make sure that there was like a legitimate no contact order put into place. And she did. And I still remember her calling me to tell me that his badge and credentials, his firearm, had been taken up. And I felt safe that someone had finally listened to me, because this had been, at that point, a month and a half, because I left on October 6th, like a month and a half, almost 2 months of no one listening to me. The chain of command not listening, the secondary chain of command not listening. And so I was just very reassured. And so I ended up taking, the hard copy of the card that came with the flowers, as well as the letter that was in the shoebox, up to the department. And that's where I was asked to be quiet, where I was asked to be silenced. And she said, I don't know who it is, but I do know that all of your friends are not your real friends. And so the things that you post on your Facebook are not private from him. And she also told me that in order to give me the best chance of a case, that I needed to kind of keep things under wraps and not say anything so that I didn't influence anything. And at this point, I had posted a TikTok talking about what happened. It was a 2-part TikTok, and I had posted that, and maybe I'll put it at the end of this. I don't really know, but I had posted that TikTok, and I had posted a couple of my babbles on Facebook, just talking about the things I'd experienced as a whole. And I think the only one that I actually put his name to was just saying, don't give him information about me. Like, just don't. And so, yeah, I felt silenced. That was the end of November. And then there was the beginning of December. In the morning, I already had a ton of things to do, and I got a phone call from the family advocacy program on base, where he worked, telling me that there were emotional abuse allegations against me for something that I had posted on TikTok. And so the guy that I was talking to at the time also worked for the military, and was like, hey, you don't have to go talk to them. Like it's harassment for them to even contact you. And my best friend had previously worked for the family advocacy program and informed me that if I did not go give my side, that they only had his side to go off of, and that I could be labeled as a perpetrator of emotional abuse for 25 years in the government system. And so put my big girl panties on and went up there and talked to her for 4 hours. And the whole time I felt not berated, but like discounted, I guess, because the whole time she kept saying, well, are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you almost done? And she was typing so slow, and that was triggering in itself because I had to keep stopping and repeating it and recounting all of the things that I had endured. The berating in the car, yelling at me when I'm trying to keep him and his daughter safe because he'd been drinking and I hadn't. Just the outlandish treatment of me and my children and things like that in our relationship. And so I'm recounting this to her, but I have pictures and videos and a whole timeline of things that have happened, because I told her, I said, it's not just what's happened since I left. It's everything that happened before and everything that's happened since. Nothing is working. He will not stop. And so they ended up closing his case, his at-risk case against me, and opening up a case against him for emotional abuse, with me as the victim, and found that it met criteria. And she told me that I met all of the signs for PTSD, and all but one of the trauma symptoms. And that in itself was validating that I wasn't just crazy and I wasn't paranoid that he was going to find me. Like, there was a legitimate reason and that there was a name for it. And so if it weren't for my friend who also worked for victim advocacy at one of the PDs in the area, seeing my TikTok and asking me to call her, I don't know that I ever would have gotten victim assistance. It wasn't offered to me. By the time they arrested him, he did like an in and out where he goes in, he just, there's a warrant, he walks in, he comes out. I still, to this day, haven't seen his mugshot. I wasn't issued an emergency protective order. I only have the protective orders for the military, and civilian law enforcement won't uphold those. His handgun license wasn't suspended for, I think it was about 9 or 10 months after the charge, which he still carried even afterwards. But the thing that got me the most wasn't the discounting from the military or the retaliation, but the silencing and the discounting, I guess, by the district attorney's office, because I had beef with them from my DWI situation. None of it was taken seriously, and so he wasn't charged on felony level, even though it met the elements of felony stalking, harassment, retaliation. And so when I met with the county attorney for the misdemeanor harassment, she had said that they had already said that they won't accept a felony on my behalf. And so they asked me what I wanted to offer him plea deal wise, and I said, send him both. Like, let him pick which one he wants. And that case drug out for over a year and a half. During which time I learned that because it wasn't listed as a felony, the woman that he ended up getting with after me had known about the case, but he spun it to where I was crazy. And she went along with it because it was a misdemeanor. And he did very similar actions towards her and then some. And I can't help but feel that my silence and my not speaking out and my not pushing harder and louder and farther for accountability to be taken, that the harm would have just stopped with me. And it wouldn't have happened to her and who knows who else. And so when I say that the cost of silence is more than the fear of retribution or retaliation or fear of them finding me and ending me, that's what I mean. because people stay silent, because people refuse to speak on the things that have happened to them, or they get gaslit into thinking that they're the problem. That is what keeps them able to do these things to other people. This is what keeps them able to find vulnerable victims and exploit them. However, and my purpose for this entire podcast is to show that it doesn't define you. I have still found people who are in my corner 100%, 120%. I have still found joy, as you've seen me talk to my emotional support animal for PTSD. I've still managed to find safety despite all of this. I've found my voice again. I've found things to still be passionate about and have drive and ambition for. And so if you've experienced something like this, you're not alone. But also, you deserve to have a voice. You deserve to be able to speak on the things that have happened to you and not be silenced because of other people's perceptions of you. And honestly, I don't care if anyone believes me. I've got receipts and documents to back it up. I don't care if people think I'm crazy. I don't care if this goes anywhere. I don't care if nobody watches this podcast. I'm getting my voice out there, and if it helps even one person recognize what's going on in their life or recognize that they are not alone, then it's worth it.